Hi, I'm Jason Gorber from thatshelf.com, and we're here to talk about Borat 2. So back in 2006, I guess it was, I was at a Midnight Madness screening at the Ryerson Theater, preparing for the world premiere. There was the opening night film that year of the first Borat film. Now, I'd seen the Ali G show. I'd seen the character. It sort of was one of the relatively minor characters in Sacha Baron Cohen's TV show. But this was not only a big deal for a couple reasons. One, it was a big major studio premiere at Midnight Madness, which was relatively rare. I can't think of many others other than, I guess, Sony doing Underworld at the Uptown. Nonetheless, all the 20th Century Fox people were there. It was all super exciting. And then a carriage showed up, a cart that had a bunch of women driving the cart with a bunch of mules inside the cart, illustrating the kind of sort of over-the-top misogyny that clearly someone like Sacha Baron Cohen is poking fun at, or at least showing its preposterousness. The film unfolded. We were watching it on film, actually, on celluloid. About 20 minutes in, there was a problem with the projection. It actually melted down. And what resulted was an hour and a half or so of one of the more surreal, insane festival experiences. You had everything from, obviously the studio people were freaking out. You had Michael Moore, who was there, deciding that he was going to barge into the projection booth because he was going to be the one to fix it. And the projectionists were like, this is a union shop. You can't actually come in here. It's like, do you know who I am? So that moment of surrealism certainly echoed everything that was going on with the film. Larry Charles and Michael Moore did some shtick on the stage. And at the end, one of the weirdest Q&As ever that had been prepared is Colin Geddes, the Midnight Madness programmer, had to read pre-made questions from to ask Borat, to ask Sacha Baron Cohen about the film that we had only seen 20 minutes of. So the end result was something that felt sort of a privilege to be part of, and you weren't going to get anything as weird and meta as that kind of premiere. I, of course, saw the film the next day, and seeing it in a different environment after all the hype, I really sort of got into the film in a very different way. But nonetheless, I had the sort of two experiences: the sort of going in as cold as possible of just those first minutes, and seeing the sort of mechanisms behind the facade, realizing the care and the precision that Sacha Baron Cohen brings to this character that seems like it should be all off the cuff and ad-lib. And of course, when he's in particular situations, he has to be thinking on the tip of his toes, as it were. But if you look at the writing credits of either of these films, there's half a dozen people that contribute to these. These are carefully constructed scenarios that sort of draw much more from the episodic work that he does and extend it into theatrical form. I actually rewatched yesterday for the first time in years the first Borat to see how it holds up, and it's actually pretty interesting how some things obviously rise to the fore and some don't. The shot of him taking a shit outside of Trump Tower, which seemed comical and silly in 2006, takes on a whole new meaning now. And then if you look at some of the other stuff, the rampant anti-Semitism, the notion of those frat kids going on about potentially bringing back slavery and stuff like that, at the time it felt silly and dark. But a lot of people, I think, particularly in the United States, saw that as sort of laughing with them, not thinking that, those people were a minority, those people were outliers. Well, those people elected a president. Those people are 48% of the United States populace. And around the world, there are all kinds of people that Sacha Baron Cohen purposely highlights that a lot of people just don't believe they really exist. Yes, the camera being there shapes things in particular ways, but the seriousness of Borat is that this kind of sort of stuck on hate, this sort of deep level ignorance, and the pleasure in ignorance, the joy in ignorance that is evidenced, particularly from the first film, is a poison to any free society. The whole notion that we have a democracy is such that we believe that each citizen actually has a voice and can speak to it. What happens when that voice is fueled by proud ignorance, which is fueled by the desire to hold on to stuff whichever sort of pantheon you wish to draw from, people who believe so strongly that particular mechanisms are out to get them, or particular mechanisms are inherently weak or evil, equally inherent mechanisms that they feel don't go far enough and that are there, are being mishandled by those that are crying foul. There's all kinds of stuff going on here. It's not simply a binary left or right simplistic notion. You have within here, like the strongest comedies, something looking really, really acutely at a politics, particularly using the United States, but also United States' view of what these quote-unquote foreign nations are, and what quote-unquote foreign people who come in and may have different points of view, that they have a balance between being polite and allowing them to say something that may be completely offensive and wrong, but also do so where their own prejudice and elements actually come out. Which brings us to Borat 2. Did we really need a second Borat? Well, do we ever need any of these follow-ups? In some ways, the second film really feels like a reminder of the poison that was sort of forgotten about in the first film. It reminds about what has come from that. We've seen Sacha Baron Cohen's shtick sort of elevate with getting more and more caustic as he's gone along. Some of his films, like Bruno, for example, are extremely, extremely difficult and challenging to navigate, because what they are against, as it were, what they're actually showcasing is itself so discomforting and so uncomfortable to watch that it just becomes super challenging. Borat 2 doesn't quite go in many ways to those levels. It certainly interrogates its own points of view. It obviously softens the Borat character, makes him much more redeeming in many ways, as we see that through Borat, and Borat can learn, maybe we can too, sort of thing. This is inevitably what happens when you have a sequel like this. You get a kid. This goes from good films and bad films. Blues Brothers 2000 comes to mind. Like, what are we going to do? I don't know. Now there'll be a kid. But this time, obviously, we have Borat's daughter, and through her own character development, obviously we can see Borat become a better and slightly less horrid human being. But there's a structural thing as well as obviously a narrative thing going on here. And the film actually touches upon it right at the beginning, is that Borat, the character, became so popular, the film was obviously a tremendous success, making hundreds of millions of dollars, that he can't just be Borat and walk into places and have most people not know who the hell he is. He shows up, I guess, in Galveston. He's walking down the street and everyone's like, Borat, Borat, high five, how you doing? And the film actually makes note of this. So one way they get around this is to obviously have Sacha Baron Cohen dress up in a number of different characters, these sort of stereotypical Yankee characters that he's toying with, but also have his daughter, who eventually goes through a sort of Pygmalion-like transformation, and she ends up being the person in doing some of the main and critical interviews. Now, as back to when I saw it at the film festival, in the Joys of Film Festival, I've said this many times, is that you get to see this stuff first. You get to see the stuff completely free from being sort of spoiled about anything. Now, I know some people don't care about spoilers. I get it. But part of what Borat does is shocks through him doing something that you didn't necessarily expect him to do. And with this film in particular, I was actually about a day late getting the screener. It actually comes out, I guess, tonight or tomorrow, the screening. I've lost track of time. But nonetheless, I got the screener after all the CNN reports about one of the critical plot points of this film. We had heard in the news, and again, this is weird, I got to navigate this, so please just watch Borat before you watch this one, just for me. But nonetheless, the whole Giuliani thing became a headline story, lots of gnashing of teeth, lots of particularly American critics like, oh my god, I can't believe he got away with this, having missed, I guess, the previous articles that we had heard that Giuliani had noted that he had been pranked by Borat and shut it all down. Now, the scene itself is incredibly egregious, and certainly the way it's presented, it's creepy as fuck. That's part of the point and part of what they're actually navigating there. But the fact that that became the news story and that became the central locus of what this film is doing is actually unfair both to the film and to the point that that particular scene is making. Giuliani is one person. There's so much else going on in this film, both the incredibly kindly and sweet fax operator who's just trying to do his job. He's in the best, I guess, possible way, non-judgmental and trying to be supportive, to these sort of doofuses that he joins up with in some sort of weird big brothery kind of moment where they're in this cabin and then they go off to do that singing jamboree thing again, which we had heard about. Sacha Baron Cohen's actually written an article in Time magazine where he talked about as one of the many times he's actually feared for his life. He actually had a bulletproof vest under the costume. He was whisked away by ambulance, the whole bit. Again, a whole bunch of people walking around with AR-15s and he's actually doing humor. That's certainly doing something. Telling jokes to power is something definitely not everybody has the courage to. Now, is this simply a matter of making fun, of taking the joke to the ultimate, of being a jackass, frankly? And I would firmly say no. Look, the Borat 2 isn't necessarily the success of the first one, in part because of the shock and awe of what it was like at that time to see a feature-like film go to the depths it actually did. We'd seen glimpses of it, but the feature really nailed that. We're now living at a time where everything seems surreal and everything is so polarized and so violent and caustic that something like Borat 2 feels much, much more powerful in some ways, but much more expected. Which means those few moments that actually are quite narratively surprising, it's unfortunate for me on a cinematic level that stuff is spoiled and sort of completely taken, not understanding the sort of scope of the film and how it actually lays out. Sacha Baron Cohen, as always, is incredibly physical and boisterous. His voices are fantastic. And some of the people he interacts with seem very much on the kindly front. He doesn't go for the jugular for a lot of these people. He lets them undercut themselves in a way which itself is quite fascinating. Or other people, he allows himself, of course, as always, to be the butt of the joke. There's nothing truly, in some ways, as comically magnificent as a naked fight. We get a lot of elements at play. We have major political figures. The Mike Pence moment comes to mind, but nothing's truly as biting as in the first film, other than this Giuliani sequence, which itself feels very strange. Not just because Giuliani is being a creepy perv, but just because at some point in time, you have to ask yourself, what the hell's going on here? And the only way that scene actually works is because of this new daughter character, who's played by this great newcomer. I think that allows even more of the awful to sort of shine through. And I think that it makes the film a lot better than it would be otherwise. How is it as an entertainment, as just sitting back and watching? I think it's okay. I don't think it's amazing. I don't think it's a failure. It certainly feels vital in that sense. But when this actually nails it, when it actually gets the points across, the jokes actually sort of come to the fore, it really does know what it's doing. It's very, very sharp again. He's lost none of his sort of intensity in terms of the elements that he's doing. And even when we have callbacks to what's taken place before, most of the time it works. The final scene is a little bit clunky, and yet why it feels clunky is it's almost too true. There's something insane and preposterous about the running of the Jews, but there's something truly probable and horrible about the whole notion of violence taken upon those people that have actually said quite explicitly that the COVID virus is a pretty bad thing and we should probably do something about it. I'm taping this right before the last presidential debate. Who knows what's going to come in the next few weeks as this election sort of comes to the fore. Again, like Borat, I'm somebody from another country looking in. I'm a Canadian looking at over the border at seeing what's going on with both a sense of distance and a sense of horror and a sense of interest. And all of these things coalesce in what this character can do. The character Borat, by being that fish out of water, can showcase the highs and lows of American society and different peoples and the way that people actually navigate. You obviously, the way it's shot, for the most part, these are unsuspecting people that are sort of thrust into quote-unquote documentary situations, and then that's twisted around. I'm always fascinated about who signs the release. There's a bathroom scene, for example, that a couple of them are blurred out, but some others aren't. I'd be genuinely fascinated in a true documentary, an honest to God verite documentary, when he's done with his character, of him sitting down and talking about the process of making a film like this. I'd be as interested in this as the making of any special effects film. I think it's super interesting about who they get involved, about what PR agencies they actually use, about what they do to actually get accreditation. Not for somebody to follow in their footsteps, but just, I believe that story itself has to have its own sort of areas of magnificence. I actually dug into the Where Were They Now after I watched the first film last night, and you have everything from a lot of people engaged in lawsuits, not surprising, but you also had, for example, in the first film when he goes to the TV studio and sort of he bums around. It's a very jokey, comical thing. It followed the fact that the producer that actually booked him was fired and spiraled into this massive depression. I mean, it's horrible. But you kind of understand the circumstances. Of course, they were fired, and of course, Borat's trying to do his thing, and his production is trying to do the thing. There's certainly an ambiguity at play here. In this film, which is dedicated to the memory of one of the Holocaust survivors that he runs into when he wears that remarkable costume. I would love that to become a Halloween hit. Although, again, when you're wearing such obnoxious Jew costumes, it's hard to know who's in on the joke and who's actually sort of taking it at face value. But nonetheless, that interaction, the story that has come out is that the family is suing, like, oh my God, you took advantage of her. And the response from the filmmakers is, this is one of the few times that after they ran the sequence, Sacha Baron Cohen actually spoke with these two members of the synagogue and let them in on the joke, as it were. Let them in on what he was actually doing, that everything that he had been saying is, of course, meant to showcase the ridiculousness and the silliness. So, fundamentally, Borat 2's totally worth your time, as you know, because hopefully you've watched it already, which is why we're having this discussion. I think it has elements that shine as brightly as the first film does. I think it's not quite as startling, and in some ways, we aren't emotionally prepared to completely rip apart the scabs at this period of time. We're living in weird and complicated emotional times, and once we have a little bit of distance from that, I think that this film will in some ways be easier to stomach, which takes nothing away from the film. This film is meant to make you look, sort of put your head in the shit and say, this is what's going on. Wake up. The last line is vote. Just vote. So to my American cousins, my friends and colleagues down south, please vote. Please have your voices heard. Please let's see what we can actually do to make the world a little bit better, because whatever you do fucks it up for us as well. Unfortunately, you guys are not quite as isolated as sometimes some of your politicians think you are, and what you guys do affects everybody on a global scale, including the hatred, including the small-mindedness, including the pettiness. And if it takes a comic legend, genius, whatever word we want to use, to actually throw monkey feces at the powerful to say, look, wake the fuck up, this is what's going on, then I think maybe now more than ever we really did need a second Borat film. For ThatShelf.com, I'm Jason Gorber. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe, leave some comments, let me know what you thought about the film. Follow us on social media, go visit our website, and do all the stuff that we'd love you to do. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next film. All the best.